Biohacking. You've heard that word before. Maybe in a podcast, maybe in a headline that felt just slightly out of reach. Maybe someone used it in a conversation and you nodded because something about it sounded important, even if you couldn't quite define it yet. Here's what it actually means. Biohacking is the practice of understanding how your body works at a biological level with enough precision to make intelligent adjustments. Adjustments that change how you perform, how you age, and how many of your remaining decades you spend fully functional. That's the real definition. No mystery, no extreme science fiction. But here's what nobody tells you about biohacking and aging. The people who live past 90 in full cognitive and physical function, the ones still sharp, still mobile, still present, they didn't find a secret. They didn't stumble onto the right supplement at the right time. They understood something earlier than most. That the body is not a problem to be solved when it breaks. It is an engine to be maintained before it does. And after 40, that engine starts running a fundamentally different operating cycle. Different fuel requirements, different recovery windows, different pressure tolerances. Most people respond by pushing harder or by giving up. Both are the wrong response. This video is about the third option. Stay with me. Let's start at the foundation, because before you can optimize anything, you need to understand what you're working with. Your body is a system, not a metaphor, an actual integrated, self-regulating biological system with feedback loops, signaling networks, maintenance cycles, and a finite set of inputs that determine its outputs. Most of us were never taught to read that system. We were taught to respond to it, to eat when hungry, to rest when exhausted, to seek medical attention when something breaks. That is reactive management of a machine that deserves something more precise. Biohacking, responsible, evidence-based biohacking, is the practice of shifting from reactive to proactive, from waiting for symptoms to reading the signals before they become symptoms. And it starts with something most people in this space skip entirely: your genetic blueprint. Here is something research in nutrigenomics has confirmed over the past decade. 2 people can follow the identical diet, the same caloric intake, the same macronutrient distribution, the same exercise protocol, and have measurably different outcomes in weight, in energy, in inflammatory markers, in hormonal response, not because one person is more disciplined, because their engines are built differently at the genetic level. This is why generic advice fails so many people after 40. Your genome influences how your body metabolizes carbohydrates, how efficiently it processes saturated fat, how it regulates inflammation, how it responds to stress at a cellular level, how quickly it clears cortisol, how well it converts certain vitamins into their active forms. This is not determinism. Your genes are not your destiny, but they are your starting point. And knowing your starting point changes everything about how you approach maintenance. Think of it this way: 2 engines, same horsepower on paper, different internal architecture. One runs optimally on high-octane fuel and a specific oil viscosity. The other needs a different configuration entirely. Put the wrong fuel in either one, and it'll run, but not well, not efficiently, and not for as long as it should. The same principle applies to human biology. What works for your neighbor's body may be exactly wrong for yours. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong at a metabolic level. This is the first lesson of responsible biohacking. Personalization is not a luxury. It is a biological requirement. Now, accessing your genetic data is more accessible than ever. Direct-to-consumer testing, clinical genomics panels, nutrigenomic assessments, these tools exist, and they are becoming more affordable and more interpretable every year. But even before you have that data, there are inputs you can begin to read right now. How does your energy respond to different types of food? How does your sleep quality change with stress load? How does your body composition shift when you change your training style? These are signals. They are the engine telling you something about its internal configuration,
Start listening before you start intervening. And the most important place to start listening, the system most people completely underestimate, is the one running quietly between your gut and your brain. In the next part, we are going to look at that connection and why, for people over 40, it may be the single most consequential system in the entire engine.
There's a conversation happening inside your body right now. You cannot hear it. Most people don't know it exists, but it is happening continuously between two systems that most of us were taught to think of as completely separate: your gut and your brain. And after 40, when that conversation gets disrupted, and it almost always does, quietly, gradually, the effects surface in ways that look like entirely different problems. Fatigue that doesn't respond to sleep, mood instability that doesn't respond to stress management, brain fog that doesn't respond to caffeine or rest, abdominal weight that doesn't respond to diet changes. These are not random failures. They are downstream effects of a broken communication line. Here is the anatomy of it. Your digestive tract is lined with approximately 500 million neurons. That is not a small number. It is more neurons than exist in your spinal cord. These neurons communicate directly with your brain through a dedicated pathway called the gut-brain axis, a two-way signaling highway running in both directions continuously. Your brain sends instructions down, your gut sends status reports back up. When that axis is clean, the signals are clear. Appetite regulation works, mood is stable, inflammatory signaling is appropriate. The control center has accurate information to work with. When that axis is disrupted, when the gut lining is compromised, when the microbial ecosystem is imbalanced, when chronic inflammation is present, the signals that reach the brain are distorted, noisy, unreliable, and the control center makes poor decisions based on poor data. Now, here is what happens specifically after 40. The diversity of your gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that live in your digestive tract and regulate nearly every major biological system in your body, begins to decline measurably in midlife. Research from some of the largest microbiome studies ever conducted has shown that by the time most people reach their mid-40s, their microbial diversity has already dropped significantly from its peak. And with that drop comes a cascade. Slower glucose metabolism, increased systemic inflammation, disrupted immune regulation, impaired synthesis of neurotransmitters, including serotonin, of which approximately 90% is produced not in the brain, but in the gut. Read that again. 90% of your body's serotonin in the gut. So when someone over 40 says they feel emotionally flat, mentally slow, or just inexplicably off, and the standard explanations don't quite fit, the gut is often where the real diagnostic conversation needs to start. This is the fuel line running contaminated. The signals reaching the control center are corrupted at the source. Now, what does intelligent maintenance of this system actually look like? 3 principles, each one evidence-based, each one practical. First, diversity of plant inputs matters more than any supplement. The American Gut Project, one of the most comprehensive microbiome studies ever conducted, found that people who consume 30 or more different types of plants per week have significantly more diverse microbiomes than those who eat fewer than 10. 30 types sounds like a lot. It isn't. Plants include vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, fresh herbs, and spices. A single well-constructed meal can contain 6 or 7. The goal is variety across the week, not perfection at every plate. Second, fermented foods are direct inputs into the microbial system, not probiotics in capsule form, actual fermented foods. Yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh, these introduce live organisms that interact with your existing microbiome. Recent clinical trials have shown that consistent fermented food intake measurably increases microbiome diversity within 10 weeks. That is a fast response by biological standards.
Third, and this is the one most people resist, chronic stress is one of the most destructive forces in gut health. When the engine is running hot, elevated cortisol, insufficient recovery, sustained psychological pressure, it directly degrades the integrity of the gut lining. The tight junctions between gut wall cells loosen. Inflammatory molecules pass through into systemic circulation. The microbial balance shifts toward opportunistic species. This is not theory. This is documented pathophysiology. You cannot supplement your way out of a gut that is being systematically damaged by an overheated engine. The gut and the nervous system share the same operating environment.
Fix one without addressing the other, and you will always hit the same ceiling. Now, the gut is the fuel line, but the fuel line feeds something far more complex. In the next part, we're going to look at the software running your entire hormonal system, and specifically what that software starts doing after 40 that most people mistake for inevitable decline. Let's talk about the software, because if the gut is the fuel line and the brain is the control center, your hormones are the operating system. They are the background program running every major biological process in your body. Temperature regulation, metabolic rate, muscle maintenance, cognitive sharpness, sleep architecture, emotional baseline, cardiovascular function. All of it is governed to a significant degree by hormonal signaling. And after 40, that operating system begins to run a different version of itself. This is not malfunction. It is not disease. It is a programmed biological transition, one that happens to virtually every human being on the planet. But here is the critical distinction most people miss. The transition itself is not the problem. The problem is trying to run old protocols on new software, expecting the same outputs from different code, and interpreting the gap as failure when it is simply change. Let's look at what's actually shifting. For women, the most significant change is the progressive decline in estrogen and progesterone that begins during perimenopause, a transition that can start as early as the late 30s, often years before any obvious symptoms appear. Most women don't recognize perimenopause when it begins. They feel more tired. They sleep less deeply. Their mood has a new instability they didn't have before. Their midsection changes in ways that diet doesn't seem to touch. And they are told repeatedly that this is just stress or aging or something they need to manage better. It is hormonal transition, and it deserves to be read as such. Estrogen is not a reproductive hormone with some secondary effects. It has receptor sites in the brain, specifically in regions governing memory, mood, and executive function. It has receptor sites in the cardiovascular system, in the bones, in the gut lining, in the immune system. When estrogen fluctuates and declines, the effects are systemic because the software it runs is systemic. For men, the shift is slower, more gradual, and that gradual pace is precisely what makes it dangerous. Testosterone declines at approximately 1% per year from the mid-30s onward. That rate sounds negligible. Compounded over a decade, it is not. The cumulative effect is a measurable loss in muscle maintenance capacity, metabolic efficiency, cognitive drive, emotional resilience, and cardiovascular protection. This is sometimes called andropause, though the term remains controversial in clinical circles. The physiology, however, is not. The engine is running a lighter version of its original software, and most men interpret this as a character issue rather than a systems issue. They push harder at the gym, they drink more coffee, they tell themselves it's just stress. It is not just stress. Now, here is where both of these transitions intersect, for men and for women. Cortisol. When the engine is running hot, sustained psychological stress, poor sleep, inflammatory diet, sedentary behavior, cortisol stays elevated. And elevated cortisol suppresses the very hormonal systems that are already in transition. Research tracking hormonal patterns in adults between 40 and 65 has documented this relationship consistently. Chronic cortisol elevation accelerates the decline in estrogen signaling,
suppresses testosterone synthesis, disrupts thyroid function, and impairs insulin sensitivity simultaneously. This is not one problem. It is one lever creating 4 problems at once.
And here is the practical implication. You cannot fix your hormonal software in isolation. You can take a hormone replacement protocol and see genuine benefit. But if the cortisol load remains unaddressed, if the engine continues running at sustained high heat, the software update will not install cleanly. It will run against the current constantly. Hormonal optimization works best when the underlying system is stable. The firmware update installs correctly only when the hardware is at an acceptable temperature. There is one more piece of this conversation that most people in this space overlook entirely. Muscle is not just structural hardware. It is an endocrine organ. Skeletal muscle produces signaling molecules called myokines, molecules that directly regulate insulin sensitivity, brain function, inflammatory balance, and hormonal communication. Resistance training, specifically the kind that places meaningful load on large muscle groups, triggers a hormonal cascade that partially compensates for the natural software decline after 40. Not replaces, compensates. The engine has a built-in resilience mechanism. It responds to intelligent mechanical load, but only when it's not already running at critical temperature from chronic, unmanaged stress. In the next part, we go into the control center itself, the brain, and specifically the difference between your brain and your mind, and why that distinction may be the most underutilized biohacking lever available to you right now. There is a distinction that almost never gets made in conversations about health after 40, and the absence of that distinction is costing people years of unnecessary struggle. The distinction is this: your brain is not the same as your mind. Your brain is hardware, biological tissue, neurons, synapses, neurochemistry, electrical signals. It is the physical organ sitting inside your skull, processing about 11 million bits of information per second. Your mind is the software running on that hardware, the patterns of thought, interpretation, and narrative that emerge from brain activity, the voice that decides whether a situation is a threat or a manageable challenge, whether physical discomfort means danger or simply effort. After 40, both the hardware and the software begin to shift, and if you don't understand what's happening at each layer, you cannot intervene at the right level. Let's start with the hardware. The prefrontal cortex, the region governing rational decision-making, impulse regulation, and long-term planning, is one of the most sensitive areas in the brain to the effects of sustained stress, hormonal fluctuation, and chronic sleep disruption. When cortisol stays elevated for extended periods, it does not just suppress testosterone or compromise gut integrity. It physically remodels the prefrontal cortex. Neuronal dendrites, the branching structures through which neurons communicate, retract under sustained cortisol exposure. Communication efficiency in the prefrontal region drops. The brain's ability to make clear, measured decisions becomes genuinely impaired at a structural level. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hyperactive under the same conditions. The result is a control center that is simultaneously less rational and more reactive. This is not a personality change. It is a physiological one. And here is the important distinction, because it cuts both ways. The same neuroplasticity that allows stress to degrade the prefrontal cortex also allows intentional practice to rebuild it. Research in structural neuroimaging has documented measurable changes in prefrontal gray matter density in adults who consistently engage in focused attentional practices, even over periods as short as 8 weeks. The hardware can be remolded at 45, at 55, at 65. Not infinitely, not magically, but meaningfully. Now, the software, this is where self-awareness becomes a biological intervention, not a philosophical one. A mechanic who cannot read the instruments on the dashboard cannot diagnose the engine. The instruments may be showing critical information. If the mechanic can't interpret them, the data is useless. Your internal states are instruments. The quality of your attention, the speed of your stress response, the duration of your recovery after a difficult event. These are all readings on your biological dashboard. Developing the capacity to observe them, not to eliminate them, not to perform wellness, but to genuinely notice them with some distance, is a form of diagnostics. When you can notice that your engine is running hot before the temperature reaches critical, you can intervene earlier, with smaller corrections, before the cascade. This is what the neuroscience of self-awareness actually looks like in practice. Not meditation as a trend, attention as a tool. Now, there is a direct biological mechanism connecting this to the systems we've already discussed, the vagus nerve. It is the primary conductor of parasympathetic activity in the body, the nervous system mode associated with recovery, repair, and restoration. It connects the brain to the heart, the lungs, the gut, and multiple endocrine glands. When the engine is running hot, sympathetic dominance, elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, vagal tone decreases. The parasympathetic is suppressed. Recovery cycles shorten. Repair becomes incomplete. Slow, controlled breathing, specifically extended exhales, directly activates the vagus nerve. This is not a relaxation technique. It is a physiological input with a measurable neurological output. Studies tracking heart rate variability, one of the most reliable indicators of autonomic nervous system health, have shown consistent improvement in vagal tone among adults who practice controlled breathwork regularly, even in short daily sessions. This is nervous system maintenance, available to you right now, with no equipment, no cost, and no clinical appointment required. And finally, the neurochemistry. Most people know the names: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. But most people think of these as feelings, as emotional states that happen to them. They are not feelings. They are molecular signals, and each of them can be deliberately influenced by specific evidence-based inputs: meaningful physical challenge, quality social connection, natural light exposure, purposeful food choices, and the simple act of completing something you set out to do. Understanding these molecules as system regulators, not as emotional outcomes, gives you leverage that most people never access, because you stop chasing the feeling and start engineering the signal. In the next part, we bring all of these systems together: gut, hormones, brain, nervous system, genetics, and look at what a well-maintained engine over 40 actually looks like as a complete integrated system. Let's step back, not to summarize, to see the whole machine. Because every system we've covered in this video, the genetic blueprint, the gut-brain axis, hormonal software, the control center, none of them operate in isolation. They are one system, an integrated biological engine. And after 40, that engine requires a different kind of maintenance than the one most people are running. This part is about what that maintenance actually looks like when it's applied with intention. Not perfectly, not obsessively, but consistently and with understanding. The first layer is sleep. And I want to say this with complete clarity. Everything else we discuss, every protocol, every nutritional adjustment, every hormonal intervention, every breathwork practice, runs on the foundation of sleep. Sleep is the overnight maintenance cycle. It is the window during which the hormonal system resets, the gut lining repairs, the brain consolidates memory and clears metabolic waste, and a process called autophagy, the body's internal cellular cleanup, runs at full capacity. Autophagy is a mechanism that removes damaged cellular components before they accumulate into larger structural problems. It is one of the most important anti-aging processes in human biology, and research has confirmed that it is most active during deep sleep and during periods of metabolic rest. When sleep is consistently disrupted, in duration, in depth, or in timing, autophagy is suppressed. Cellular debris accumulates. The system runs progressively dirtier. This is one of the clearest biological mechanisms connecting chronic poor sleep to accelerated aging. Not a correlation, a mechanism. Sleep is not recovery from life. It is maintenance of the engine that makes life possible. The second layer is the fuel system. After 40, the question is not how much you eat. It is what signals your food is sending. Every meal is a biological communication. It triggers hormonal responses, inflammatory cascades, and microbial shifts within hours of consumption. The quality of that communication determines the quality of the operating environment your cells work within. High-quality protein, distributed consistently across the day, supports muscle maintenance, the structural hardware that keeps your metabolism active and your hormonal signaling intact. Diverse plant inputs feed the microbial ecosystem. Healthy fats support the brain and the integrity of every cell membrane in the body. The engine after 40 doesn't need less fuel. It needs better fuel. It needs more precise fuel. And increasingly, the research suggests it needs that fuel timed intelligently, aligned with the body's circadian biology, not simply consumed whenever hunger or convenience dictates. The third layer is mechanical load. Your structural components, muscle, bone, connective tissue, require progressive stress to maintain integrity. Not punishment, intelligent, graduated challenge. Resistance training after 40 is not about how you look. It is about preserving the hardware that keeps everything else functional. Muscle tissue is metabolically active at rest. It burns fuel continuously. It produces hormonal signals. It reduces systemic inflammation. It protects cardiovascular health. It maintains insulin sensitivity. Sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass with age, is one of the most consequential and underaddressed processes in human aging. It is also one of the most responsive to intervention. The hardware deteriorates without load. It responds to load. The fourth layer is thermal management. An engine that never cools down wears out faster. This is not metaphor. It is thermodynamics applied to biology. Chronic sympathetic activation, the sustained fight-or-flight state that modern life imposes on most adults, is one of the most consistent predictors of accelerated biological aging across every measurable marker. Telomere length, inflammatory load, cardiovascular stress, hormonal suppression, cognitive decline. Recovery is not the absence of productivity. It is a physiological requirement for an engine that needs to run well for another 4 decades. Deliberate parasympathetic activation through breath work, movement in low-stimulation environments, quality social connection, or structured periods of complete cognitive rest is thermal management for the biological machine. And the fifth layer is diagnostics. You cannot optimize what you cannot measure. Knowing your key biomarkers, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, HbA1c, lipid fractions including particle size, high sensitivity CRP, homocysteine, hormonal panels, vitamin D, thyroid markers, gives you a real-time diagnostics panel. Not to obsess over numbers, to detect drift before it becomes damage. An engine with regular diagnostics fails less catastrophically and costs less to maintain than one that only gets examined after something breaks. Now, here is the integration point. These 5 layers do not operate in parallel. They operate in a loop. Sleep quality affects hormonal output. Hormonal output affects gut health. Gut health affects brain signaling. Brain signaling affects stress response. Stress response affects sleep quality. It is one closed system. Pull any one layer out and the others begin to compensate until they can't. This is what biohacking, done responsibly, is actually addressing. Not one symptom at a time, the system as a whole. And this is what living past 100 in genuine functional health actually requires. Not a single intervention, a maintained system, run with increasing intelligence over time by someone who understands the machine they are inside. Before we close, I want to make something very clear.
Everything we've covered today is not a checklist. It is not a protocol you download and follow for 30 days to see results. It is a framework for thinking about your body differently. And that shift in framework, from my body is betraying me to my engine needs different maintenance after 40, is the most important thing you can take from this conversation. Because here is what I've observed over and over in the research and in real people navigating this stage of life. The ones who age well are not the ones who found the perfect supplement stack. They are the ones who changed their relationship with their own biological data, who learned to read the signals before they became symptoms, who understood that the same body that felt like it was failing was actually communicating clearly, consistently, in a language they just hadn't been taught to speak yet. That language is learnable. At 42, at 55, at 63, the engine is still communicating. The question is always whether you are listening. Now, if this kind of conversation is what you've been looking for, the real conversation, without hype, without shortcuts, without someone trying to sell you a transformation in 21 days, then this channel is built for you. The human engine exists for one specific person, someone over 40 who is serious about running their biological system with precision, who wants the science without the noise, who understands that healthy years matter more than total years. If that's you, subscribe and stay close, not as a favor to this channel, because this is the information your engine needs, and you deserve to have it delivered consistently in plain language by someone who takes your biology seriously. We also have protocols, deeper resources, and a community of men and women doing exactly this work, and this channel is where that conversation begins. Now, let's bring everything together, because there's one last thing I want to say about biohacking, about living past 100, and about what this actually means for the decade of life you are in right now. The decade that, for most people, is either the beginning of serious decline or the beginning of the most deliberately maintained period of their entire biological history. Which one it becomes is not entirely random. We started with a word, biohacking. A word that sounds like it belongs to someone else, to someone younger or richer or more technically inclined. But over the course of this conversation, I hope it's become clear.
Biohacking, the responsible kind, belongs to anyone who is willing to learn how their engine actually works and then give it what it actually needs. That is all it is. And after 40, that willingness becomes something more than interesting. It becomes necessary. Because here is what the research, taken together, is telling us. The major causes of functional decline in later life, cardiovascular failure, cognitive deterioration, metabolic disease, hormonal collapse, loss of structural integrity, are not random events. They are the accumulation of small, chronic, unaddressed system failures. Cellular debris that was never cleared because sleep was consistently shallow, gut lining that was never repaired because the engine never cooled down long enough, muscle that was never preserved because no one told you it was an endocrine organ, not just tissue, hormonal software that was never supported because it was running against a cortisol load no protocol could overcome. These are not dramatic stories. They are quiet ones. And quiet failures are the most dangerous kind because they are the easiest to miss until they are the hardest to reverse. The good news is the same truth in a different direction. Small, consistent, intelligent inputs compound. Not in a motivational sense, in a biological one. The gut biome that becomes more diverse over 6 months of deliberate food choices genuinely changes the quality of signals reaching the brain. The muscle mass preserved through consistent resistance training genuinely maintains the hormonal environment that keeps metabolism functional. The sleep that is protected, intentionally, as a non-negotiable maintenance window, genuinely supports the cellular cleanup that slows biological aging at a measurable level. These are not promises. They are documented physiological responses. The engine responds to what you put into it.
And the most important thing I want to leave you with is this.
You were not given a broken engine. You were given an engine that was built for a long run, and that needs a different kind of maintenance after 40. More precise, more patient, more attuned to its actual signals, rather than the ones you wish it were sending. The mechanics change. The machine does not stop being worth maintaining. Now, here's what I want from you. Share this video with 5 people in your life who are somewhere in the middle of this transition and haven't found the real conversation about it yet. The person who keeps saying they feel off but can't explain why. The one who's tried everything and is running out of explanations. Send it to them. Leave a comment telling me what part of this conversation landed differently for you today. I read them. They shape what we build next. And if you want to tell me what to go deeper on, cardiovascular aging, sleep architecture after 50, the metabolic mechanics of perimenopause, cognitive resilience in the aging brain, leave it below. That is how the next engine diagnostic gets built. Subscribe if you want to stay in this conversation. This is the place where the science is real, the language is plain, and the respect for your biology is absolute. Until next time, keep optimizing.